Hi, everyone. One thing before we get started, we are asking for you to bring us your listener questions. We are excited to produce 2 episodes for you featuring listener questions. Questions like, what diet should I eat while on chemo? Or what's going to happen to my love life after cancering? Or maybe something simple like, where do I get the best information on the internet? We're here for all of those questions and we'll get you the answers. So go to our website, www.cancering.com, and click on the questions page to submit your questions on the form.
For me, because I survived it, I have to make my survivorship count. And that means I am making sure that my story is heard, that I share the stories of others. I put a real life face on cervical cancer, and the stigma is really horrible. And so I'm really blessed to be able to meet people when sometimes they're at their lowest and inspire and empower them that their story matters.
Welcome to the Cancering Show. Our guest today, Tamika Felder, a fellow South Carolina native, is practically the definition of a cancering community. What do I mean by that? When she was diagnosed with cervical cancer at age 25, she didn't feel like she had found a community of survivors who would help walk her through what was ahead. So she created her own community. How impressive is that? I am so happy to be talking with her today, even if it is on Zoom. Today, we're going to talk about the community she created and also the terrible stigma that women with reproductive cancers face in our culture. Let me tell you a little bit about Tamika. She is an award-winning television producer who has interviewed hundreds of people, including Joe Biden, Patti LaBelle, and Shaka Khan. She's an international speaker, has been featured in a documentary, has been on the cover of Newsweek magazine, and most recently was with Jill Biden at the White House sharing her story. She currently runs Cervivor, a nonprofit for cervical cancer survivors, and in that role visited USA Health in 2020 to help us host a survivorship class. Her current production work includes launching a lifestyle podcast and working on a documentary about cervical cancer, the women living with it, and the vaccine that prevents it. Tamika lives just outside Washington, D.C. with her husband and her stepdaughter. I can't wait for y'all to meet someone that I have had the privilege to call a friend and a kindred spirit for over 10 years. Cancer is just something that we all have to recognize, acknowledge, cope with, live with, struggle with, rage upon, crush, and even thrive with. This show is more than knowing and fighting or beating cancer. It's more than just relaying science, hope, and technology. Together, our purpose is to demystify cancer, take away as much fear out of the diagnosis, treatment, and process as we can, defeat its grip on our lives. This is The Cancering Show. Welcome, Tamika. We are so excited to have you, to introduce you to our listeners. As you know, with our season 3 being all about community, of course, you were the top of my list. Tell us more about your experience of looking for and then creating the community that you needed.
You know, in 2001, I was diagnosed with cervical cancer. And it's funny. So today's a good day. I can say I was diagnosed with cervical cancer and it doesn't, emotionally gut punch me. Other days, I could be a ball of tears or whatever. But in 2001, when I thought I was just adulting hard, living my best life, working as a television producer in Washington, D.C., I got diagnosed with cervical cancer. It seemingly came out of nowhere. And if the hits didn't keep on hitting, I was told that in order to save my life, I would have to have a radical hysterectomy. And so what do you do with all of that? So I did what any young person in the early 2000s would do. I went to the internet that was barely there at the time.
Right. Dr. Google was still in medical school.
We didn't even have social media. I mean, literally, I think Facebook may have only, no, I want to say Facebook maybe was only on college campuses then, but there were websites. So I went to the library. I pulled out my encyclopedia. I dusted it off.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
I got on AOL. Remember those AOL chats where you could connect with people all over? And I was just, I feel like I was just ranting. And I wanted to find someone who was in their 20s, not married, diagnosed with this cancer, could potentially die, lose their fertility. I wanted someone who had my similar story, yes, that I could connect to. And now let me say, I feel like my cancer center, my family, my coworkers, they all supported me the best way that they could, but there is nothing like peer-to-peer support, right?
Absolutely.
So, how I got to community, the short way is I created what I wish I had, right? I created what
Yeah.
I wish I had to help me navigate through cancer. So, the social worker, the nurses, my oncologists, they were really great, right? I mean, I do have complaints, but they're not like blaring complaints, right? But I didn't have that person to say, here I am 5 years later after being diagnosed with cervical cancer, losing my fertility, putting the pieces back together, living my new normal. You're going to be okay. Now, I had people who told me
Right.
that you're going to be okay, but they never
But
had
how did
chemo.
they know?
Exactly. They never had chemo
Right.
coursing through their veins. They never had their vagina area radiated, right? Like they
Hmm.
didn't have to go into surgical menopause. So how did they know? And I wasn't buying it. I felt the care and support, but I also felt like, no, I need to talk to someone who's having sexual dysfunction after a radical hysterectomy. I need to talk to someone who's hot flashing. I need to talk to someone who is depressed because they cannot carry a child. Like, I want to talk to someone like that. And so
Right.
I found my people. I created it.
I love that. And I love the evolution from Tamika and Friends to
Mhm.
the organization now called Cervivor and that amazing play on words. Can you take us through that part of the story?
Yeah. So when it started, it was, when people would always say, thank you for creating this. You helped me so much. And I'm thinking, like, I'm so selfish. You're helping me. That's the reason why I created it. And I didn't know what I was doing. You give me a script and copy, and I can do a newscast. I can come up with an amazing video. But creating an organization and keeping people engaged, I feel like I didn't know that, but I'm a people person, right? I'm from the South. We're both from the South. We have this gift of gab. We have this love of people. So that's what I had. And I had a real zest for wanting to get to know people's stories. So when we started in 2005 as Tamika and Friends, it really was about support. It was not only supporting the patient, but also their family members or anyone who wanted it. It's because we didn't want anyone to feel alone. But during
Yeah.
that time of really creating that foundation, so the organization was founded in 2005. We really started doing the work in 2003 because my friends kept saying, how can we support you? And that's why it was called Tamika and
Right.
Friends, right? And so during this time, we had the HPV test, be FDA
Hmm.
approved. Then we had the
Right.
HPV vaccine. And it's like, wait a minute. So there are these cancers, we don't know the cause. There's these cancers we can't do anything about. And you're telling me now for cervical cancer, we have a test that can detect the virus that causes it. We have a vaccine that can prevent it because back then it was only FDA approved, the vaccine for cervical cancer. And I said, we have
Right.
to do something more. So then it became about patient advocacy. Because when I looked
Hmm.
at breast cancer, I would see, wait, there are patients out there telling their story. That's why there's not a stigma with breast cancer. Look at colon cancer, look at skin cancer, look at all these different cancer types. What's missing with cervical cancer? We don't have patients shifting that narrative. And so if there's one thing I know how to do as a television producer, I'm a glorified storyteller, right? Because I'm Southern and because of professionally as a television producer. So I was like, I can help shape the story. And that doesn't mean that I'm sharing falsehoods. It means that I want to help you share your story, not only so that we can spread awareness and get people to go get screened, but also so that we can prevent this for future generations.
Right. And we talk all the time that a patient sharing their story, whether we're talking about to a parent trying to decide about vaccination or to a lawmaker trying to decide about policy that really increases access to these tools, you've got to have patients who are willing to talk about it. When we look at the stats, when I go to these talks and I sit there and, people are like, well, I don't know someone who's had cervical cancer, supposedly only 14,000 women in the United States per year. And when I say the word supposedly, I want you to think about, who that has breast cancer. And I want you to think about in breast cancer, there are 240,000 cases of invasive cancer And there's 60,000 people who are stage 0, or what we call DCIS. And all those people are told that they have breast cancer. They are breast cancer survivors, and they go out in the world and they wear pink in October and they rah tell everybody to get their mammograms. In cervical cancer, we have 330,000 cases a year of CIS, carcinoma in situ of the cervix, that is stage 0 cancer. But we don't tell them to tell their friends, and they go home ashamed from their OBGYN office because they have abnormal cells that they maybe had frozen or scraped or burned away, and they live in hiding and in fear. And so when I give these talks, I always say, if you know somebody who's had breast cancer, you know someone who's had this procedure. They're just not talking about it, and they're not wearing teal and white in January, and they're not out there telling everybody to get their PAPs. So sometimes as physicians or as advocates, we have to do that for them. But you went a step further. You really trained people how to be advocates. This is the part that's so amazing to me.
You know what was like an aha moment for me? So I feel so just honored to be able to share my story, right? Especially when I'm with a lot of doctors and, I feel like maybe I shouldn't be sitting here, but I feel so honored to share my story, right? But at one of the early meetings, someone was doing a presentation. It was a researcher, and he was talking about cervical cancer diagnosis in 2001. I think it was like a stretch. I think it was like maybe 2000 to 2005 or something like that, right? And he was giving us, and all of a sudden, a light bulb went off. I'm a part of that data. I'm in that number, right? And so when I got up, I was able to say, I'm a part of what you just talked about, and I made it. I survived it. So for me, I want to make my survivorship count. I know how easily I could have been one of those people who didn't survive it, right? That's the reality of this thing. And I don't judge people who don't want to be patient advocates, who don't want to tell their stories. But for me, because I survived it, I have to make my survivorship count. And that means I am making sure that my story is heard, that I share the stories of others. I'm holding doctors accountable, that they also work and not projecting that stigma on the patients. And so the organization can be both. It can be part support, but it can also be part patient advocacy, right? And there's a little crossover between the two. There's some that will do both. They'll want to be there to give and receive support, and there are others that'll want to go through our Survivor School and become patient advocates, right? But if they choose to only do one or none of the other, it's okay. It's really okay. And so what I really did that I don't think I intentionally set out to do, I put a real life face on cervical cancer, and not just here in the US, but I'm helping to do it globally as well too, where in some of these countries, the stigma is really horrible. And so I'm really blessed to be able to meet people when sometimes they're at their lowest and inspire and empower them that their story matters.
Well, you have done so much around the country and around the world. We can't wait to hear more about it. This is a great time to take a break, and we'll come right back. The Robert E. Reed GI Oncology Research Foundation, based in Birmingham, Alabama, was created in 2002 while Robert Reed was battling pancreatic cancer. Mr. Reed felt strongly that creating a focus on GI cancer research and patient care would accelerate the discovery of a cure. Since its inception, the foundation has significantly raised awareness and understanding about all GI cancers. The first fundraising event, Finish the Fight Iron Bowl Party, was held in November of 2004. This annual event, as well as other endeavors, continues to produce financial support to fund research and patient care. Among other things, the Reed Foundation has supported summer research programs for high school students, college and medical students, as well as residents at the USA Health Mitchell Cancer Institute. For more information about the Reed Foundation, visit reedgifoundation.com. So, Tamika, we were just talking about the fact that you do this work not just nationally, but internationally. And you've said before that it comes with a lot of love, but a lot of loss. Can you talk to our listeners about that?
Whew, that's such a deep one. You meet these women and they become an extension of your family, right? Like any sisterhood, there are sisters that get on your nerves and they annoy you. And I'm sure they feel the same about me. But there are people that come into your heart. I remember right before the pandemic, when we had our last Survivor School in Chicago before the world shut down, I remember telling someone, like, I'm not going to get close to any of these women because if someone dies, my heart just cannot take it anymore. And there was this one woman, Becky Wallace, who just crept into my heart. This month actually is the anniversary of her death. It's going to be a year. And I encourage your listeners to go to our YouTube page and look at Becky's story. She leaves behind two beautiful little girls, our junior Survivor ambassadors. They made themselves honorary Survivor ambassadors. But the reality
Oh, I love that.
is that they imprint on my heart, right? And
Yeah.
I'm lucky to still have a relationship with her children, but I feel like for every loss, there's a piece of me that doesn't die, but my advocacy flame burns harder. But I have to get over, like, why do I do this? Why do I do this? Why do I keep doing this to myself? And it's because I survived it and they didn't. I look at Lisa Moore, who a lot of people have now been using her video when they talk about HPV vaccinations. I met Lisa in 2016. She came to our Survivor School. We knew she wasn't going to survive. She called me and she said, I want you to document my story. And I want you to show people what cervical cancer did to me. It's not easy. And it was a
Right.
very hard thing to do. But what happens is now we have Lisa's living legacy. She's able to tell her story. We share her story, but she's also able to share in her own words. People are able to see her. That also helps when maybe a patient isn't available or there isn't space for a patient to be there. So now someone can
Right.
share that story. But it really is hard because people do die of cervical cancer. And so for me, I am honored that these women allow me to come in when they're in their last moments of life to capture them on camera. It's hard to be a fly on the wall and not feel that pain because I feel it. But at the same time, what they're doing is ensuring that people know that this is not an easy cancer. Because I think people think, oh, you get a hysterectomy, you get cells removed, you're fine. And that's not always the case.
Right. And unfortunately, for the women diagnosed with cervical cancer, a third will die of their cancer. Unfortunately, it is devastating. And as you said, too often it's incredibly young women who lose their fertility or lose their life, leaving children without a mom, leaving a family with this giant gaping hole. And as you said, I mean, I've just seen it too many times. It makes me sad and angry and fired up at all at the same time. And I think it is so amazing that you have continued to show up and have continued to fight this fight. And you are a cancer celebrity. You are, I mean, you are. You were featured on Newsweek. You were featured in the Someone You Love, the HPV epidemic, which for any of our listeners out there is an incredible story of how HPV affects women's lives and how we can now stop it with the HPV vaccine. And we're talking today about how to be a survivor and an advocate, but you went even a step beyond that. I still think about a ovarian cancer patient who the cancer center often asked to speak during September for ovarian cancer awareness. And she came to me and sat down her teal covered phone and just said, I'm so tired. Can it please get to October and somebody else be in the spotlight? I know you've got to feel that way sometimes. There's so much work to do.
I do, and I want to share the air. I want other people to do it, but I also know that it is emotionally exhausting. Basically, you're reliving the pain over and over again. And like I said, sometimes I talk about it and I'm fine. There are other times it literally is ripping not only the band-aid off, but pouring salt in the wound. And it just depends. It just depends what's going on in my life, what's going on in the world. But it is hard because I've dedicated my life to it, right? I always tell people, don't be as dedicated as I am. Because, for example, my husband and my stepdaughter, they're like Survivor comes first, right? And they're not
Yeah.
lying. It's true. I can lie and say that Survivor does not come first, but it is true. I put this organization as my baby. I poured my heart and soul into it, and not for narcissistic reasons, because I don't want anybody else to die. I want people to,
Yeah.
I want to go in the grocery store and I want to see a teal and white ribbon. And I don't want people to ask what that means. I want them to know it. I want people to automatically know in January they should be supporting cervical cancer. I want people to stop stigmatizing people. So for me, I made a promise when I opened my eyes up and I survived it. Like, I'm not making this up. I literally made a promise. And it doesn't mean that I don't take breaks, because breaks are healthy. But the truth is, I'm
Absolutely.
never not completely not working on it in some way, shape, or form. So I tell people you have to have a healthy balance. For me, the pandemic really helped ensure that I put not only myself first, but my family as well. Survivor's still pretty high up there. But we've had, we've had some incredible people to come in and help carry the torch. And so, and I'm not getting younger. I don't plan on going anywhere anytime soon, but when I'm not here, I would love to see this effort still going. And hopefully, it will be like, remember when we had cervical cancer and there was the stigma and nobody wanted to get vaccinated?
Yes.
Now we're holding all these screenings and we've got almost
Right.
100% vaccination around the world. That's what I hope the organization is doing, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I keep saying I'm going to retire as soon as we hit those WHO cervical cancer survivor goals.
Mhm.
So that's for those of you who haven't seen it yet, 90% vaccinated around the world, 70% of women screened, and 90% treated. And that seems like, I mean, the bare minimum, right? How
Exactly.
is it that that's the goal, right? That should be like, duh, we're already doing that.
Mhm.
But yeah, and then I'm going to retire. And as I sit here today, I never thought I'd say the words in my own lifetime. Alabama's 2021 data is 62% HPV vaccine up to date, which is incredible considering where we started.
Good work.
And, my first goal was just to get where the ball was rolling downhill, where, and when you go to the soccer game and you turn to the woman on your right and say, did your kid get that HPV vaccine? And she says, yes. And you turn to the woman on your left and say, did your kid get that HPV vaccine? And she says, yes, that we're like more than halfway. That's when I felt like we're going to be there. That then we're ball rolling downhill. This is going to be so easy. It doesn't feel easy every day, but it is
We'll take
your
those little
work.
wins.
And
We'll take those little wins.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. You spoke a little bit about the shame and the stigma, and we don't see that around breast cancer now. I know it used to exist in the 80s and even the 90s, when even mentioning the word breast in public was considered taboo. How do we get there with GYN? How do we get here, and how do we get there?
We still have a long way to go. Now, I will say I have
Yes.
seen advancements in the 21 years that I've lived in this space. I have seen that we have made progress, but there are still so many women who are ashamed. Do I ever think we will get women who are not ashamed? No. I just think because of where cervical cancer, the positioning in the body, the way that we talk about sex, not only in this country, but just around the world, I don't think we'll ever get there. But I do think we can do leaps and bounds better than where we are right now, because we have to normalize things. And that's what happened with breast cancer. That's what's happening with colon cancer. We have to normalize things. And I know that we're going to get there. But will it be, where everybody's just talking about coochie cancer? No. But
Right?
I think as we also
Don't
talk
we
about
wish?
the other HPV cancers too, I look at how people with, say, oral pharyngeal and anal cancers look at cervical cancer. Like, you guys have done the work. Y'all are rock stars. And I'm like, no, we still have people
Right.
dying, but I get where they're coming from, right? So I
Because
just,
we have a screening test and we
exactly.
have regular exams and we have doctors who know how to screen, and they don't have those things.
So I think we just kind of keep the train on the tracks. We keep going. We make sure when we round those curves, we're being careful so we don't derail. But at the same time,
Yeah.
there's certain points where we have to speed up, right? I think about Jillian Scalfani. I remember when she died, she left behind two boys, one in high school, one very young. And she said, science is happening, but it's not happening fast enough for me. And that's always stayed with me, right? So at times, and I
Yeah.
know that there are people working really hard behind the scenes to make it a better space for people diagnosed with cervical cancer. But how can we help make sure that there are more research dollars, more funding, more opportunities for us to work a little faster? But I know
Yeah.
work is being done.
Absolutely. And, there's the implementation science, the science of speeding up getting discoveries to the bedside. The average for a discovery made in a lab to get to a patient's bedside is 20 years. That's a whole generation. And we've known that HPV testing was better than pap smears for at least 10 years. And we are just embarking on starting these national programs with HPV testing only. And so we gotta speed it up. We gotta put a little gas behind these discoveries.
Timing is everything.
Yes. And I think that when we think about that, we also have to think about funding, just like you said. We know that women's cancers are overrepresented and underfunded compared to men's cancers. And I'm not saying that legislators do that on purpose, but
But it's
rather,
a fact.
but it's a fact. And once pointed out, and the fact that 50% of the population is women, then we need to do better. And once you know better, you do better.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that we've got to keep our foot on the pedal. And I think we have to keep people accountable for making sure that we are funding the research that goes into diagnosing and treating women's cancers, in particular, the research that goes into how do we get these discoveries to women. Cervical cancer patients, like every cancer patient, need better treatment options. So we're not radiating the hoo-ha. As we said, there's so much more that we could do, and super excited for the discoveries that are still coming down the pike. I think in our lifetime, we're going to see self-sampling for HPV at mobile units that will, have a mobile mammography parked at the local library where you get your mammogram, your HPV self-screen, your vaccines, your colonoscopy test, perhaps, or colon cancer test, possibly even a blood test for lung cancer. I mean, these things are within our reach. And, I hate to see another 20 years go by before we have access to that for our patients.
And access to all patients, no matter where they live, what their social economic status is, just everyone.
Absolutely. And as we envision this future better world, I hear you have some special news about your future that maybe you would share with our listeners.
So I feel like this is where I won't be articulate because I just if you're listening and you can't tell, like all of my teeth are showing, like I'm smiling like a mad woman. The most surreal thing happened in my life. So during the pandemic, there was a woman who came into our Survivor community. She heard my story. It's not funny at all, but this is just me being awkward and giggling because I'm still pinching myself, honestly, that this is happening. But she heard my story. She couldn't believe how I wasn't able to become a mom. There's a whole long story, and I won't get into the story. I'll give you a reason to go to our website, cervivor.org, cervivor.org. But
yes,
my doctor did everything right. I did everything right. But, ultimately, I wasn't married. There were some archaic laws on the books in Maryland where I lived, and insurance denied me. And also egg freezing wasn't where it is now. The technology wasn't there. So anyway, all of these things happened.
correct.
And I didn't get to preserve my fertility, right? There were some things that were done, others that weren't. Fast forward many years later, I've accepted that, my life won't be the lives that I birth into this world. It'll be the lives that I save, right? And so I had
Yeah.
accepted that. It doesn't mean that I didn't find moments of sadness, but I did accept that, my life is not going to be filled with children that are of my body. So fast forward to March of last year, this woman who's a cervical cancer survivor, she and her husband welcomed twin boys via surrogate. And so I remember when I said, "Oh, congratulations." And she responded, "I can't wait for you to experience this." And I thought, "Ooh, that's odd at this point in my life because I'm
Right.
I was 46, I'm 47 now, so I was 46, even though, my mantra is like, it's never too late for anything. So literally, I was like, okay. And then she sends me another message and she was like, I want to talk to you about something fun. And she and we laugh so much about that now. And so I'm like, what do you mean
Oh my
something fun?
gosh.
Now in retrospect, she didn't want to scare me. So on April 1st of last year, she called me. We had a talk and
Wow.
I literally thought she wanted to host a webinar or a support group for people who are becoming a parent via surrogate. And she offered my husband and I their unused embryos. And so I'm going to be a
Wow.
mom. I'm literally 7 weeks away from my son being born. And to say that I wouldn't say I'm scared. There's a little bit of nervousness just because, it's a human and you have to keep this human alive. You're responsible for everything for it, but I'm up for the challenge. But
I know you are.
talk about my story coming full circle in a way that I have never ever imagined it would. Yeah, I can't believe it. I'm overjoyed. I'm happy. I feel so loved. I think she truly saw me. She saw that even though I said that I was okay, I wasn't okay. I blame it on the pandemic. But I've always been my most vulnerable self. And I remember when I shared my story and she learned about it, I remember thinking, like, I got to stop talking about this because I don't know if it's because I'm sitting at home. I don't know if there's nothing else to do, but this is hitting me emotionally in a different way. Whatever it was,
Yeah.
she saw it. And I'm honored that she chose me. I think it's the ultimate love of community. I think it speaks to our
Yes.
survivor community because until July of this year, she was a stranger essentially. Me and my husband flew to Portland to meet her and her boys and her husband. And I keep calling it a modern family. We're just one big, happy, modern family. And it's
Absolutely.
not anybody else's story, but it's mine. And I'm excited to welcome this beautiful boy into the world. It's my little turkey that's coming.
I love it. You said it's baby Campbell's origin story.
Yes, and how beautiful that he gets to hear the story and learn the story, and how beautiful her boys get to know how their mother's such a beautiful human being. As I said to her, like, I don't even know if this is something that I would be able to do, but you never know until you're in those shoes.
Right.
And I just love her for that. So they will always be our family. And I love them dearly. And I'm just so grateful. And my husband isn't outnumbered in our house because he has a daughter. And so it's always been 2 against 1. And so now he gets someone on his side. But no, my baby's going to be a
I
mama's.
love it. Of course he is. Well, everything about your story is just amazing. I'm covered in goosebumps about your wonderful news, which I even, of course, knew before our interview, but just hearing you talk about it and the joy that is just spilling through you across the airwaves. And we're so, so grateful that you came and shared your story to our listeners, that you talked about how you created this community that didn't even exist. And what an amazing, as you said, full circle, so amazing that this community has now brought you a family and brought your family together, I should say, of course, and made it complete. So thank you again. Thank you for sharing all of this with us.
You are so welcome. Thanks for having me.
What a great interview. I can't tell you how much I love. Tamika always puts a very real face on cervical cancer, both in the United States and around the world. She is such a wonderful advocate for all GYN cancer survivors. Now, let me just put my doctor's hat on for a minute and tell you more to highlight the vaccine that prevents cervical cancer, or the cancer shot known as the HPV vaccine. It's recommended for adolescent boys and girls, can be given as young as 9 all the way up to age 26, and can be considered for adults 27 to 45. Also, for our listeners who would like to know more about how to get in touch with Tamika or her organization, you can find it at cervivor.org. That's CERVIVOR. Thanks again for listening. And don't forget to submit your questions at www.cancering.com. We're going to be doing 2 special episodes throughout the season. We're here for all of those questions and we'll get you the answers. This show is brought to you by the University of South Alabama Mitchell Cancer Institute. MCI is a cutting-edge cancer research and patient center built to fight cancer smarter in Mobile and Baldwin County, Alabama. Our researchers and clinicians focus daily on the struggle against cancer, serving a potential catchment population of more than 4.1 million people, with a singular focus of advancing cancer diagnosis, treatment, and prevention throughout the Gulf Coast and beyond, with science, technology, and hope. Want to know more about the Mitchell Cancer Institute? Visit us at usamci.com or search for us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Mitchell Cancer Institute is a member of USA Health. To learn more about all of our hospitals, clinics, and services, visit usahealthsystem.com.